I'm going to talk to you a little bit about value for value and how Bitcoin enables new value layers for the internet. Before we get to that, I want to look a little bit back into history, actually, and talk a bit about another innovation, not Bitcoin, that probably changed our lives significantly. And without that, we wouldn't be here, which is the World Wide Web, an information sharing network. It had a huge effect on all parts of our lives. It completely changed how we share information and how we spread information globally. Before the World Wide Web, we had a broadcast model typically. Like we had a very few senders and we had many receivers. The information flow was very in one direction. So this is what we typically know in the television case or in the radio case. We had one big organization that produces content and that shares it with a big audience. And as we all know, the internet came about and completely changed this. Since the World Wide Web, we now see many senders and many receivers. Basically, every sender has also become a receiver of information. It got easy to publish information on a global scale. So the direction of information here is flowing in all directions. So this is actually a great and huge change. We take it for granted right now, but it had a very significant influence. So because it reduced the cost, the internet reduced the cost of publishing to a global audience. It lowered the barrier. It doesn't matter anymore if you're a big television station or a big radio station or you're a kid from the countryside. You can publish to a global audience very cheaply. And all this is actually possible thanks to open protocols that enabled open innovation. So that's obviously HTTP, HTML, and all these protocols that were implemented in the last decades, more or less. These made these innovations possible that we could build on top of that. And even though we had a standard to transfer information, we did not have a standard to transfer value in the same way. We were missing that since then. In all these years, it was impossible to have economic interactions in a same way. To pay online, we always had to transfer information, and we had to have some middlemen, some companies to facilitate these transactions. So the monetization really relied mostly on advertisement. This was the result of that. What you all know is that we have websites full of banners. So if I, as a user, want to request information from a website, I get the information back, and I get some ad banners in there, tracking pixels in there, and so on, just because we only could send value from the big organizations, from the big ad networks to the websites. That was the only way to monetize it. So the monetization models were still stuck in the broadcast model. But the future, and the funny thing is actually, the HTTP spec back in the 90s already was envisioning the idea of having native money on the protocol layer. This is the famous 402 payment required spec that a server can tell a client to send a payment. But we were always missing, and because you know that, we were always missing it was often tried, but we were always missing the protocol. And obviously, this is where we get to, whoops, that was too far, but that's where we got to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. So this is now possible because of these innovations that we had in the last year, that we have a value sharing network. So with the Lightning Network now, sats can flow like information. It's a peer-to-peer network, and we now suddenly can model direct economic relationships. Similarly, we do that with information so far. And this brings us to the idea of value for value. So among other things, value for value is a big topic, but among other things, it's a new monetization model. So it's the monetization model for a native internet money that we now have with Bitcoin. So, and it's especially interesting if we look at non-scarce information, which means anything digital on the internet is always a copy. It's easy to reproduce. It doesn't matter if you have a podcast with 10 listeners, 100 listeners, or 10,000 listeners. Once you have produced it, you can always copy it to a larger audience. This is the great thing that we have actually in the digital space. And value for value now enables this direct economic relationships between the sender and the receiver, between the producer and the consumer of the content. And because information is not scarce and information wants to be free, we can now enable voluntary transactions, actually. So it's really like focusing on rethinking how we look at value for digital goods. This quote from Gigi describes that really well, and I think this is important to understand because a transaction involving a digital photograph of an apple is very different than a transaction involving the physical apple. So if you have a photo, you can copy it any times, but only one person can actually eat the apple. And this idea of value for value is happening for the last years, and just with the Lightning Network, it became really popular and possible in many of these innovations. And it's happening right now. It's actually nothing that is like a future thing. And just to look at some of this, where this is happening, one of the main drivers, obviously, is the podcasting space, under the umbrella term Podcasting 2.0. So Podcasting 2.0 basically describes a few initiatives to advance the podcasting, or to keep podcasting decentralized. Podcasting is a very interesting medium, actually, because it's a very diverse one. You have many players that are in that space, very different stakeholders. You do not have this one big centralized platform. They're all still one of this medium that always has built on open standards. And there the Lightning Network and value for value fit really, really well. And though the podcasting industry, the Podcasting 2.0 scene embraced the idea of play to pay instead of pay to play. Meaning, so while you're listening to it, while you're listening to this non-scarce information of podcasts, you as a listener are under control and you're sending sats to the podcaster, which is a huge difference. And thanks to the Lightning Network, actually, these payments now become a user interaction in a podcast player. So I have here two examples on the left, from your, and on the right here is like Breeze, one of the first wallets and players that integrated the idea. The user can just choose how much sats they want to send per minute while listening to the podcast, and it gives you the amount per hour, for example, that you send a cent per hour over. And the idea here is really like the podcast is valuable for you. So while you're listening to it, you're streaming sats to the creators. Another example that we just talked about in the panel before, super exciting because it's kind of starting from the greenfield, is Nostr, where the idea of, or where the Lightning Network and the idea of value for value is really natively integrated into the protocol through this idea of SAPs. So users can send SAPs to nodes and profiles, and basically their SAPs replaces likes. You don't no longer only like press an unvaluable like button, you really send sats, economic transaction to the author of this node. It was invented by Will, who did the Damus Nostr client, the iOS applications, but it's adopted with many others like Amethyst, Snort, Primals, and so on. It's really getting popular there, so please try it out if you haven't yet. And now if you look at this image again, we actually now here have the case that the user can request information from the publisher, from the websites, get the information back, and can, in return, can send the value directly to the publisher. We no longer need to go this detour route through advertisers. So it's really an alternative to that. And to add on this is sats have a much stronger signal than likes. They mean much more than typical like that you would have when you browse Facebook or something like that. And we can use this information now again also for content discovery. So the question about signal versus noise is a big one on the internet. What is valuable content for you to discover? And if your friends are interacting with that content and streaming sats to certain creators, it also might be more valuable for you for content discovery. So economic interactions have a much stronger signals than typical likes, and we really have also this feedback loop between consumers and creators. And with that, we can build for creators, for example, analytics and discovery services, and it also describes a new metric for content discovery. And just to leave you here with two examples, there is two great projects, especially one shout out to Conchex, who's building a dashboard here for creators to analyze the sats they have received from the audience. You can really see on which part of the episode users have sent messages along with some sats to it, and you can really have analyze the engagement of the with the users here. And this is just the beginning, actually. I think Bitcoin and the Lightning Network really enables these new ways of flowing, not only like streaming value through the web, and that allows us to attach an economic transaction to any user interaction that we see on the web. So these were just two examples, and we will see many more in different industries, I'm very sure, in the future. So it's value for value is a new way to think about value online in the digital space, and open protocols like the Lightning Network and like Bitcoin foster this innovation to make this possible. With that, thank you. I hope that was a quick, brief intro. And if you have any questions, I'm not sure if you have time for one question, maybe. I think we're running a bit late on time, but you can always, please visit us. It's getting to the end of the conference, but visit us at our booth, and we can give you a bit of a deeper intro, and we can look at some of the apps together. Thank you so much.